talk a little bit about how this piece of material came along and why it grabbed you.
It came in the form of a novel. Well, I should say, a true account purportedly called The Long Walk, Polish author, the substance of the story. And I was very excited about it, but then, fairly quickly learned that there was a question mark about whether the author was actually on the walk. Ever since the book was published, it's been dogged by controversy, despite never being out of print. And so I thought I couldn't do it really, unless I knew the walk had really happened. So I said the co-producers, as they became that challenge, if we could prove the walk happened, then I would do the film. I would make it fictional, inspired by both the book and dedicated to, perhaps unknown men who did make the walk. And that's what finally did happen.
And this is sort of familiar territory for you in the sense that you seem to very much enjoy putting characters into very inhospitable landscapes, whether...
Which you've had recently.
Yes, this is like nothing compared to Christmas weekend in New York. I'm thinking whether it's a sort of a culture clash, as in Witness, or literally people in sort of very, very inhospitable physical conditions, like in the Mosquito Coast or in Gallipoli when they're in Turkey. What is it that sort of draws you to these almost sort of Conradian adventure stories?
Well, I've been uncomfortable and thinking which one's forced to do in a kind of interview situation, to look back and compare, because I like to think each one's fresh. I'm beginning again, and I want to be surprised myself and enter new territory, as it were, creatively. But you have to, we're fortunate to have had a long career, it's not a lot of films, but you have to look back and see patterns. I can only imagine it's probably, as with many things that are deeply within us, they go back to childhood or to youth. And in my case, I think probably, it's the Australian background, living so far from Europe, which were my roots, so third generation, but mainly Scottish background on both sides of the family. And I went back to Europe at 20, 1965, that was the cheapest way to go, was by ship, 5-week voyage, and I really, it was a great gift in a way, because I got the sense of distance that we were from Europe, which you can't get on an airplane. And at the same time, it was really a rite of passage. I changed my life completely, that trip. I was going to go into a different field. There was no film industry. And I came back to determined to make a life in what I call sort of show business in some form or other. Writer or actor. Didn't think of directing. But anyway, I think that journey, and not for many, many decades, feeling quite comfortable at home as an Australian. Because I think when I came to Europe and went to Scotland, I thought I would feel, the eureka moment, this is who we are. But I didn't have that moment. But I did in Europe. I thought I am a European. But, therefore, unlike the majority of Australians, my friends and so on, are not interested in that kind of thinking. But in my own case, I do think there was a certain rootlessness, a certain, and then a life in film led me to travel.
And talk a little bit about the casting of the film. And when you have a film like this, it's really a handful of major characters who are on screen together all the time. Does it affect the casting process in terms of, not just thinking about is this actor right for this role, but is this group going to work as a unit?
Because very much, yeah. It was like I think for the first time, another element in it, maybe with Dead Poets Society to a degree, because it was a group of kids at school. But with this one, I knew that, there were going to be days where they weren't doing much, and that would test the ego of an actor, particularly a ranking actor. So I kept an eye on that, and certainly had that conversation with the various individuals, saying, you'll feel like you're a kind of extra at times. And I think that probably was a little bit more problematical in the only location set shooting, which was the camp. Once we got outside and got on the walk, which is the majority of the film, I think they turned it to an advantage by thinking, well, if I'm not doing anything for the next 2 or 3 days, I can just experience what it would have been like, because they were, going through very similar locations.
And I think when we first talked about the film, we talked about the fact that it is, on some level, a movie about walking, which is this sort of very primal human endeavor. We crawl and then we walk. And did you think about it at all in those terms? And maybe you can also say something about the sort of walking consultant that you had on the film.
Yes, you're talking about, I saw his name go through as we were standing there, Cyril de la Fosse-Gourmand, young French guy, who was in his 30s, and he was the first person I went to see when I decided to make the film. He did the walk, inspired by the book, I think in 2000. His actual job was in IT, which is interesting, but his hobby is walking. And anyway, he was inspired by the book and set out and made that walk from Siberia. We had a friend with him on one section of the trip, but mostly alone, carrying his own food. And he was living in Vientiane in Laos, and so it wasn't that far from Sydney, so I flew up to meet him, first person here. And it was good because he loved the book and had done a lot of research on the whole story of the Gulag. And there was this experience he'd gone through. And right away I was saying, tell me a typical day, what sort of rhythm you get into, what it was like in the site. Let's go section by section. And I found in the end that, I said to him, can I put some of what you're telling me into the film? For example, the mosquitoes. Any of the adventurers that I did talk to and do credit at the end there, a couple of Australians who, I would call them adventurers, who'd been in Siberia in the spring or summer, talk of, the melting permafrost and the incredible problem with mosquitoes. They're very big and they can, can make you ill. And so Cyril told me about having seen this man without any mosquitoes, and he had some bark he boiled and he showed him how to do it. Hang around your neck, some sort of citronella or something that protected you until you needed to refresh it.
When I was just watching the film again just now, I was struck again by the incredibly beautiful death scene of the Saoirse Ronan character, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you approached that scene, because I think deaths in movies are sort of often a very cheap or exploitative or emotionally manipulative gesture, and this is, by contrast, a very lyrical, poetic, simple scene that's incredibly powerful.
Well, I believe it was Ingmar Bergman who said there's only one thing you can't do on screen for which the audience will not suspend disbelief, and it's death, which is a reasonable observation. But it stuck in my mind, and I think I've looked at that area twice to see whether you could kind of do it, that is to say, sense a loss of a character in a quite a profound way. The first time was Gallipoli, and with the death of the young fellow at the end of that, and then again in this film. But it was interesting, in doing extensive research, interviews with the survivors in Moscow and Siberia, survivors of the Gulag, Poles in London, then immense amount of reading, talking to Anne Applebaum, who is my advisor, who's the current, her book Gulag would be the reference book you'd go to today, Pulitzer Prize-winning book, which is wonderful help to me. The thing I got was that there was so much death in that era, in the 20th century, but specifically, let's say, in the Second War, that people, I don't say got used to it, but you helped them to die in certain instances, to pass over, that funny old, almost Victorian phrase. And so I was interested in trying that, I got quite interested that in leading up to it, I thought I've got to, if I went back from those 2 deaths in the desert particularly, to the front of the film, I'll take anything out that and keep the music out and all sorts of things in order to build a reality so that when you do, as it were, lose these characters, it will have some impact. And I'm not sure yet how successful I was, but because we are surrounded with death on screen, you know, both in news reports every day, unfortunately, and in movies, you know, the kind of just constant shooting that goes on, and people blown away and all of that sort of thing. But, so I was very interested in that, and very interested in them helping, particularly, you know, when you see, well, both those people really, the young artist, pastry chef, Thomas, and the young girl, Raina, dying, you know, that we would say, well, you know, let's help them go and carry on.